Meanwhile, Australia is continuing to descend into tyranny in the name of COVID control. They're implementing, get this, facial recognition apps that force residents to regularly upload their location to the government. People aren't allowed to speak to their neighbors. Now, one Australian premier is talking about completely banning the unvaccinated from participating in society.
When we get to those vaccination double dose thresholds as part of the national plan, the notion of a lockdown of the whole community is far less relevant. But what will, I think, become a bigger part of our response is a lock-out of many, many venues for those who are not vaccinated.
It's unbelievable. Gideon Rozner is the Director of Policy at the Institute of Public Affairs in Melbourne, Australia. He joins us now to assess. I always thought Australians would have it right. Man, when it comes to Melbourne, you couldn't be more wrong. You're the most locked down province city in the world, 207 plus days. Why?
Why indeed, Brian? It's because since the get-go, we have pursued in Australia a policy of basically zero tolerance for the coronavirus. Now, the lockdown that Melbourne is currently going through, its sixth lockdown, was triggered after just 6 cases. Not 6 deaths, not 6 cases of hospitalisation, 6 infections. In Sydney, the lockdown that's been running since June was triggered over just 28 cases. This is reaching absurdity that Lewis Carroll himself couldn't come up with. And as you said, Brian, it has triggered the descent into tyranny in Australia. It has overwhelmed all of our checks and balances. It has extinguished all or suppressed all of our individual rights and freedoms, and it has upended every norm of liberal democratic governance. And if it can happen here in Australia, of all places, it can happen anywhere. And I'm sorry to say that includes the US. So Americans need to worry about incursions to their liberty coming from coronavirus hysteria, because it can happen anywhere.
And I did see about 200,000 people protesting in France over the weekend, and multiple arrests because they're tired of the lockdown. What I find it strange is this app. Tell me how this app works. If you get contact traced, you have to show your location through this app?
So this is a proposal by the state government of South Australia for returning travellers who want to pass through the 2-week quarantine system. Basically how it would work is if you are quarantining at home and you are supposed to be at home for 2 weeks under house arrest, you'll get a prompt from this app. You'll have to take a photo of yourself in the location you're supposed to be in. And if you don't do that within 15 minutes, the police can show up at your door. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, Brian. This is from the same state government that recently rounded up people and put them into quarantine hotels, not because they were actually sick, but because they visited a venue that a sick person happened to go to, a winery in South Australia, where, by the way, they have had extremely few coronavirus cases. As I said, this is allowed governments to do things that we never thought possible in terms of breaching our fundamental rights. And people are all right with it because of the fear and paranoia that governments have encouraged and unleashed in the population.
On behalf of Americans, on behalf of America, we always thought that Australia would be almost the live or let live society, but it's not. You can only leave your house for 2 hours to shop and exercise. The curfew is from 9 to 5. It was triggered in June, and Melbourne has now been locked down, the most locked down city in the world. And guess what? There's no sign of a let-up, but the rest of the country has a bit of freedom, correct? And they don't even let you leave the country and travel to those freer places.
Correct. Well, not only do they not let you leave the country, not just if you're an Australian citizen, but if you're a permanent resident of Australia who has a citizenship to another country, you cannot go home, which in any other situation would trigger a diplomatic incident. But this today was reported that Australian troops who have been deployed to Afghanistan are having trouble getting back into Australia. They're stranded in Dubai now because the government of the state of Queensland will not give them an exemption for quarantine requirements. So Australians who have been sent in uniform to defend this country cannot return to it, Brian.
And the story is, it's mostly unelected bureaucrats, not elected politicians making these decisions, which makes it all so scary. Gideon, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian.